Merry Christmas, everybody. I'm Tyler, and I'm here to let you know that Disney's A Christmas Carol is no perfect movie. And not gonna lie, I didn't know how to feel going into this one because I'd seen the first 20 minutes on TV a few years ago, and I liked what I saw, but it wasn't really enough to keep me watching. I did change the channel, I did read some of the reviews, and I found out that people had a lot of great but also crappy things to say at the exact same time. And not gonna lie, having finally seen it, I can safely say that it has a lot going for it. The performances are very good. The motion capture work is outdated, but I don't think it's as bad as some people make it out to be. And it is extremely faithful to the original source material, but maybe a little too much because when it tries to go for the emotional punches, it either doesn't work or succeeds way too much because of how faithful it is. You can tell that they are just quoting the book verbatim like it's a Shakespeare adaptation, especially if you're like me and you watched the Muppet one that also quoted the book word by word, and this back to back. I just sat there and I went, wow, these movies weren't really all that original other than the added in touches of being performed by Muppets or being portrayed through sometimes realistic, sometimes exaggerated looking animation. But in my opinion, why does this keep happening? In my opinion, the best thing that this movie has going for it is Jim Carrey's performance as Ebenezer Scrooge. Don't get me wrong, the visual effects artists do add a lot to the performance in regards to adding in facial features and textures that Jim Carrey definitely doesn't have. But in my opinion, the body language that the artists are tracing over, combined with his grizzled voice, does really suit the character whenever we're watching him. Because when he's supposed to be this imposing bully, his body postures are very still. He speaks in a high pitched but very blunt line delivery that makes you instantly hate everything that he says. But when he becomes more remorseful over his actions, he starts speaking and moving at a more rapid pace, and you feel the anxiety that he's going through. And then once he's finally redeemed himself, he's kind of amalgamating both of his personalities. He can be very stilted and calm, but it's when he's being very passionate towards others, and he still has this high, enthusiastic, well-paced energy, especially at the very end when he's carrying Tiny Tim on his shoulder. Moments like that were very effective, and I gotta give Jim Carrey credit because he's giving so much to this performance as he usually does. When he's portraying the ghosts, he's a little hit and miss though. Like, with the Ghosts of Christmas Past, I like his hypnotic, snake-like Irish accent that he portrays that makes him charming but sinister at the same time. I didn't like that it was just Jim Carrey's face photoshopped onto this flame head. I would have preferred if the flame head had no face whatsoever. Make it a little scarier, but also more mysterious at the same time. The Ghost of Christmas Present has the most realistic looking design with his facial features and his clothing, but dude laughs way too fucking much. I hit mute like 3 or 4 times, and that did not need to happen whatsoever. The Ghost of Christmas Future is definitely the scariest looking one because he literally is a ghost, and he has this carriage and horse that reminds me of the Headless Horseman from Sleepy Hollow, but the beginning of the Ghost of Christmas Future sequence felt like more of an Army of Darkness sketch than a Christmas Carol, because there's this stupid chase that Scrooge goes through where he shrinks, he takes a bunch of pratfalls, and I just sat there and went, did Sam Raimi guest direct this sequence? It doesn't fit with the rest of the movie. Now, in regards to the side actors, because, yeah, there are side actors in this movie, the way that Jim Carrey portrays Scrooge and the ghosts at the same time, almost as if the ghosts were his conscience, they have actors like Gary Oldman and Robin Wright to play multiple parts that kind of contrast within the other while also complementing each other. Gary Oldman plays Jacob Marley and Bob Cratchit, Scrooge's past and present business partner. And Gary Oldman stands out more as Jacob Marley because he's going full blown over the top. He wants to portray the insanity that comes with roaming the earth nonstop as penance for his past actions, and that part definitely worked. It was suitably creepy and over the top, but then they start throwing in jokes like how his mouth is misshapen and he has to constantly jerk it back and forth, and it made absolutely zero sense. That was one of the scenes where it had to be all dark or all funny like Goofy did in Mickey's Christmas Carol. That was effective. This was just fucking lame and went back and forth from being lame to way over the top creepy, and it just didn't always mesh. And even though he spends more time playing Bob Cratchit, I didn't think Cratchit really stood out all that much because this movie made me realize how little he actually is in the book. And I didn't think Oldman was given that many opportunities to really add a lot of sympathy to the character. On top of that, I thought his design looked the dumbest. The bald head and sideburns, in my opinion, just didn't match up whatsoever. Robin Wright plays Scrooge's younger sister and Scrooge's fiance. As the sister, she gets like 1 minute of screen time, and we learn absolutely nothing about her. We learn nothing about her and Fred growing up together. It just seemed like a waste of time. But as Scrooge's fiance, she had this really great speech where she really is the first person to put Scrooge in his place without offering any sympathy to him, because at that point, he didn't really deserve it. But at the same time, she's not like Fred or Cratchit where they despise him, but they're willing to hold out the littlest glimmer of hope. She is completely past that because she has seen things that Fred hasn't, Cratchit hasn't, and we as an audience hasn't. So it actually does kind of make sense why she's not giving him the benefit of the doubt at that moment. So the performances themselves are good. How's the motion capture 10 plus years later? Well, usually with outdated effects like this, I think that they look better from a distance than they do up close. But in this movie, it's actually kind of reversed. Scrooge and Marley look incredibly photorealistic with the added in wrinkles, the extended nose, the amount of detail that goes into their facial hair through the textures, the colors, and the very dim lighting. I love the way that this movie is lit. It provides this really creepy, mysterious, gothic atmosphere throughout the entire film, and on that end, that's where the darker tone of the movie succeeds. But whenever characters are far away in the distance, their skin looks very rubbery, and they don't move around in a photorealistic way. And you can tell that those scenes were 100% animated with no stand-ins ever, especially the Fezziwig dance, because even though it's the most uplifting scene in the movie, they're all dancing, the music is very nice, they're all having a good time, they're dancing at the speed of light, they're flying in midair like a spinning top, and it really just took you out of the moment. I'm not saying motion capture doesn't work at all. There have been good examples where it has, like Polar Express, for the most part. I just don't know if Zemeckis was the right person to really introduce it to the masses, but I mean, who knows? He hasn't given up on CGI, and he might get better over time. At least I hope he does. So, yeah, the problems with this movie, not just because of how outdated the effects are, although I will say, Robert Zemeckis is really good at making the backgrounds look photorealistic. It's not a feature that most audiences would notice because we're too busy looking at the characters, but the backgrounds themselves, in terms of, again, textures, color, and lighting, look very natural, and Zemeckis captures that through all those tracking shots that he uses to really make you feel as if you're in the moment and you're experiencing the entire location. During the Ghost of Christmas Past sequences, there are a lot of scenes that are actually tied together as if they were done in one take, kind of like Birdman, and I wish Zemeckis focused on that aspect of the technology rather than trying to make everything realistic, because he was never going to. So, we have good performances that are kind of offset by crappy motion capture, but the biggest problem for me was the tone of the film. This falls into the usual trap with a Christmas Carol movies that make me not want to check others out, even though they have great actors like Kelsey Grammer or George C. Scott. They try so hard to focus on the darker elements of the story, the consequences of Scrooge's life that he can't fix, and wait for the most uplifting moments to happen later, even though the book from beginning to end really is an optimistic tale, because right from the beginning of the book, you have Cratchit and Fred trying to encourage optimism in someone who is higher than them in terms of class and employment. So I don't really understand why it's such a challenge to go back and forth from being dark and uplifting throughout the entire film. If I were to categorize most Christmas Carol adaptations, they would either be comedy dramas or just straightforward dramas. This was a horror movie, and a horror movie where it doesn't stop scaring you until the last 10 minutes of the movie, and it's just so unbalanced that way. I wouldn't mind if the scenes added in, because Zemeckis does add a couple scenes in, were necessary, but they aren't. I mean, do we really need to see a ghost fly up to a woman and her child going, "I am so sorry"? Hell no, that was just overkill. That was insane. Like, even when he tries to be faithful, Zemeckis still fails by being too dark. Like, the characters of Ignorance and Want. Do we really need to see those to get a reaction? No, it's bad enough that we have to watch Cratchit react to his own son dying, which I will say this, the death of Tiny Tim in this one is one of the saddest because Cratchit and Scrooge, without spoiling anything, are actually face to face with each other and they both look constantly depressed. And it was such a beautiful moment. I almost teared up at that. And I wish that Zemeckis focused more on balancing the uplifting and the depressing in order to really get a solid and earned reaction out of the audience. So, as I said before, A Christmas Carol does have a lot going for it. It also has Colin Firth being the one that looks most like himself, even though he looks like a Barbie doll. And I should also give credit. Cary Elwes not only plays a couple of background characters, but he also stood in for Jim Carrey whenever he had to play Scrooge and the Ghosts at the same time. And for that, Cary Elwes deserves credit in my opinion. There's just there's a lot to talk about, and that's not really a good thing because sometimes the effects are decent, sometimes they're crappy. The performances are good, but sometimes you don't really get to acknowledge the actors because the effects just stand in the way all that much. And as I said before, if you're going to do a horror version of A Christmas Carol, balance it out. If anything, that Sam Raimi thing that I just said, he should have directed this. He knows how to direct horror and comedy. He did a Disney movie with Oz the Great and Powerful. He knows how to use CGI effects to a decent enough quality. It just, this movie is a mess, but not gonna lie, I still would watch this over and over again because Jim Carrey is really good as Scrooge. The ghosts themselves, even though they look stupid and act stupid, still lead to a lot of very effective moments. And when Robert Zemeckis gets the tone of the book right, it does work. And for all those reasons, I'm going to give the Disney A Christmas Carol a 3 out of 5. So, if I had to rank all 3 Disney adaptations, I would put Mickey's Christmas Carol on the top, Muppet Christmas Carol in the middle, and then this one at the very bottom. They all have good qualities. They all have negative qualities. Well, not all of them. Mickey's is perfect in my opinion. Guys, thanks as always for watching. If you have seen Disney's A Christmas Carol, God, I'm getting fucked up on this. If you have seen Disney's A Christmas Carol, let me know in the comments below what you thought of it. Be sure to stay tuned for more reviews, and be sure to like and subscribe. Take care.